Hello, it's Anna here. In this video, I'm going to talk about some common sleep problems and some ways that we can use to deal with them. Many of the people that we meet with chronic pain tell us that as a result of their pain, their sleep has become pretty disrupted, and hopefully, there'll be something in this video that will be useful for you in terms of things that you can take away and apply and try in the next few weeks to improve your sleep. In this talk, I'm going to try to answer the following questions. Why do we sleep? How much sleep do we need? And is not sleeping dangerous? I'm also going to mention a couple of quirks of sleep and use those to help you get a better understanding of the nature of sleep so that you can use those to your advantage when you're thinking about what to do to improve your sleep. So, why do we sleep? Well, the obvious answer is to allow the body to rest and repair itself. However, we can do this while resting. It seems that resting without sleeping still allows the body the chance to make the necessary repairs. There is one particular area of the body that requires sleep in order to operate effectively, and that's the brain. It seems that the brain requires sleep in order to make sure that what we've learned gets stored so it can be easily retrieved later. Not sleeping seems to make learning harder. So, how much sleep do we need? The figure you hear most is this magical 8 hours. However, people vary in how much sleep they need in order to be able to function effectively. An additional problem is that we're very poor at working out how much sleep we've had, and most people underestimate the number of hours they've managed to get. Who hasn't heard their partner saying that they didn't sleep a wink last night, but you remember being woken up by the sound of their snoring in the middle of the night? The next question is not sleeping dangerous? The answer, unfortunately, can't be a straightforward yes or no. Scientists generally believe that it's dangerous to not sleep at all. Although there haven't been any experiments, there are stories of people becoming ill or having seizures or going into comas when they've been completely denied sleep. Despite having sleep problems, most people get at least some sleep. So this kind of terrible outcome doesn't happen very often at all. At the same time, sleep problems are very common, and whilst there's been some research showing that people sleeping less than 6 hours or more than 10 are more likely to have poorer health in the long run, it isn't clear cut. Again, this isn't from experiments, it's just from observing people. So it's hard to tell whether poor health is a consequence of poor sleep or the poor health is actually causing the poor sleep. One thing that is clear is that worrying about not sleeping is counterproductive because it becomes just another thing that's stimulating your brain and preventing you from sleeping. Generally, the more we try to sleep, the less likely we are to fall asleep. This is because sleep is a completely natural process and it's not under our control, although there are some things that you can do to set up the best conditions for sleep. There are various things you can do to not worry as much. It can help to bear in mind that you probably got some sleep, even if you can't recall sleeping. It might also be helpful to remember and then remind yourself that even after a bad night, you probably coped better with the demands of the day than you expected to. Another peculiarity is that we don't necessarily get more and more sleepy the longer we're awake. If you don't believe me, consider the following. Night shift workers tell us that despite being awake for a long time, perhaps the whole of the day before their night shift, and then awake throughout their night shift, they'll get home, having been awake for possibly 24 hours. And despite this, they say that they're often wide awake and frustrated because they can't sleep. Why does this happen? This is because our sleepiness, and to a similar extent, how alert we feel, is largely determined by the daily rhythm of certain hormones. Some hormones make us feel sleepy, And if things are working normally, these hormones start to circulate a couple of hours before normal bedtime, and then they gradually build up as the evening and night wears on. Similarly, other hormones make us feel alert, and if you track the level of these in the body, you usually see a spike in these around the time that we would normally be waking up. The levels of these hormones are largely determined by something that we call the body clock or our circadian rhythms. The rise and fall of these hormones are usually strongly related to whether it's daytime or nighttime, but this rhythm can be easily disrupted. You may have noticed this disruption yourself if you've ever gone on a long haul flight and experienced jet lag. As an example, you arrive at night time in Orlando or wherever you're going, having been traveling all day and awake for hours, but you find yourself unable to sleep because your body is still on UK time where the morning has just dawned. As you may have experienced yourself, jet lag tends not to last, and over a few days, your sleep wake cycle will get used to a different time zone and adjust the release of hormones to fit this new day night cycle. This tells us something important. That is, that the sleep cycle isn't fixed and it can adapt and learn. Exposure to daylight is a major factor in this retraining of the sleep cycle, and that's largely what happens when we're getting over jet lag. Our brains learn that day and night have shifted, and then it alters the pattern of these cycles of hormones to match it. So we become sleepy at night time and alert during the day. Similar effects are seen in people who work long-term night shift. How do things go wrong, and why are sleep problems so common when people develop chronic pain? Perhaps the most important thing is that pain disrupts normal routines, which in turn can throw these sleep and hormone cycles off balance. First off, there's the obvious thing of pain interrupting sleep, either by making it hard to get off to sleep or by waking people up during the night. If this becomes a regular occurrence, then problems can develop. There's also the part that we can play in making problems worse sometimes. If you've had a disturbed night, it can be very tempting to try and make up for the sleep that's been lost by trying to sleep past the time you'd normally get up. If you're no longer working, perhaps because of pain, it can be easier to let your normal routines slip. Without the pressure of having to get up for a normal work time, waking times can start to drift, and this can have a knock on effect on bedtime. Also, when people are in pain, bed is often the place they feel most comfortable. Combine this with pain medicines that can cause drowsiness, and it can be very easy for people to start having naps. Some pain conditions also involve significant fatigue, and that can make it even harder to stick to a routine. I've already mentioned the kind of things we all do in response to sleepless nights, but which can affect our normal nighttime routines, such as varying the time when we go to bed and when we get up, alongside taking naps during the day. If this is one off, it's not such a problem, but if these patterns carry on for a while, they can have an effect on confusing our rhythms. This reveals something interesting about our body clock, and that is it can learn. This is what happens when you travel a long distance. Initially, the sleep system's confused. Suddenly, it's dark outside, but you're wide awake. Soon it learns that you're in a different routine and it adjusts itself, but it can take a few days to get there. Our body and our sleep system can learn in another way, and that's through association. This is something that's fundamental to humans and animals. If you put two things together often enough, our brains figure out that one thing predicts the other. This learning can even affect biological processes. If you don't believe me, look up Pavlov's dogs, where the dogs are trained to salivate as if they're about to get food when they hear the sound of a bell ringing. Something similar happens to sleep. When we're in a steady routine, our brain gets used to certain things predicting sleep because they either happen before sleep or at the time of sleep. One major predictor of sleep is our beds. In the normal run of things, whenever our brain sees our beds, it usually means it's bedtime. It's a good predictor of sleep, and this causes things to happen in the body in order to make sleep easier. However, if you're in bed and awake, perhaps because you've woken in the night and you're tossing and turning in bed trying to get back to sleep, you weaken that association between bed and sleep. Leading on from what I've just said, it will be obvious to you that routine is important. Having a good routine should help train your sleep system to respond better over time. Likewise, if you nap during the day, your brain's likely to wonder why it's so light outside. The other, or perhaps the most important thing, is not to lie tossing and turning in bed while you're trying to get to sleep. By doing this, you break the association between bed and sleep and are building the association between bed and being awake. Taken all together, if you stay in bed whilst you're awake and sleep during the day, bed and darkness become weaker at predicting sleep, and your body won't respond to these things in the way that it has done previously, and it won't prepare you for sleep. Based on what I've just said, there are some tips that might help to tackle those disturbed rhythms and routines that we're in. First, you should try and go to bed at the same time each evening and get up at roughly the same time each morning. This helps your brain to predict when it needs to deliver the hormones to make you sleepy and to make you alert. Similarly, you should avoid napping during the day unless this is going to be a permanent change in your routine. But remember, if you nap during the day, it's likely that you're going to need less sleep at night, so that will have to be factored into your routine. The other kinds of things that break this association between bed and sleep is doing activities like watching TV, playing on computers or phones or tablets. Again, this is building that unhelpful association in your brain. Bed no longer predicts sleep, but it predicts movie watching or social media browsing or game playing. No wonder your brain doesn't see your bed and think sleep. Well, what do you do then if you can't fall asleep at the start of the night or if you wake up in the night and can't get back to sleep? The sleep experts all agree that you should get out of bed if you've not fallen asleep within a quarter of an hour. There's no need to clock watch, as we tend to be fairly accurate at working out roughly how long we've been doing something. Ideally, if you're not asleep after a quarter of an hour, you should get up, go into another room, and do something quiet and boring. Hopefully, after not too long, you should start to feel sleepy, and if you do, you can go back to bed and see if you fall asleep. If sleep doesn't come within about a quarter of an hour, you should get up and repeat that cycle as often as necessary until you fall asleep within about a quarter of an hour of getting into bed. Sometimes people find that their sleep habits have gone completely to pot and somehow they've managed to turn night into day and vice versa. There are a number of ways to tackle this, and in some ways it is like jet lag. Tough way to tackle it is by limiting sleep during daylight hours and only sleeping during nighttime hours. But also bear in mind the advice on not tossing and turning in bed. This will work, but it's likely to be uncomfortable and you might find it very hard to stick to. A gentler approach is to try gradually to shift your body clock round. This will likely take weeks, if not months. If you find yourself falling asleep too early in the day and waking too early in the morning, then try staying up an extra 15 minutes each night. Remember to set your alarm 15 minutes later in the morning. Also, remember to stick to the other bits of advice around routine and not being in bed when you're awake. Similarly, if you find yourself not falling asleep until the middle of the night and lying in until midday, then do this process in reverse. Set your alarm clock for 15 minutes earlier each day and try to go to bed 15 minutes earlier each night. Eventually, your sleeping pattern should come round to a normal day-night cycle. Of course, it isn't just having a good routine that helps lessen sleep problems. Even if you have the best habits in the world, if there's enough noise or light, for example, stimulating your senses, then you'll likely wake up. So it's also important to try to minimize these sources of stimulation as best as you can. Try to cut out sources of light, maybe buy backup blinds. Cutting out noise from street is also sensible. Heavier curtains might help, or if your bedroom at the moment faces a road, is there a way to switch rooms around so that your bedroom is maybe at the back of the house, away from street noise? Maybe try different earplugs to find something that suits you. Hunger's another thing that can wake people. Trying to have a light snack in the evening can keep hunger from waking you up. Avoid eating a heavy meal, obviously, late in the evening, and snacks that have a high sugar content. There are lots of other things that can stimulate the senses. Caffeine has long been recognized as a stimulant that can interfere with sleep. Perhaps monitor and reduce your intake. Remember, it's not just coffee that contains caffeine, but tea as well, other fizzy drinks, chocolate. Worries can be another source of stimulation. Your mindfulness practice might help. Another tip is to leave a pad of paper and a pen beside your bed so that you can leave a note for yourself to avoid that sense of I must remember to check this or I must think about saying that tomorrow. And that can get in the way of sleeping. Alcohol can also interfere with sleep. Although it is a sedative, for various reasons, it can cause people to sleep more lightly. Exercise and movement, whilst it's something that's very helpful, can keep us awake if we exercise too late in the evening. The same goes for housework or DIY or working late into the evening. Being too hot or too cold can also wake us up, as well as needing the toilet. There are various things that you can do to stop these things waking you. And if it's some of these things in addition to pain that are causing you to wake, then it's worth reducing the things that are within your control. So, before we meet up next, I'd like you to have a think about which of the factors that we've talked about today might be interfering with you getting a good night's sleep. Make a note of some of the suggestions in this video and think about how those things might help if you were able to change them. One final thought. Changing one thing might not be enough to get you into good habits. It probably took a long time to develop problems with sleep, so improving them is a long-term process. But it's one that can work with effort and consistency. Good luck.